In the long contested lands between Central and Eastern Europe, the city of Krakow or Krakow has long been an object of international involvement. One of Europe's most historic cities, its population has always been overwhelmingly Polish-speaking, and in the present day it's a showpiece city for Poland. However, through history, not only has the city itself been contested by Poland and other powers, but it also sits near a regional divide between Galicia, of which Krakow is a part, and Upper Silesia, both of which have themselves often been controlled by different powers. One of these cases came in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. In the decades leading up to the wars, Poland, including Krakow, had been steadily divided, controlled, and eventually partitioned by its rivals in Berlin, Vienna, and St. Petersburg. Krakow and Western Galicia had been taken over by the Austrian Habsburgs, while the Poles also proved that these arrangements would not be free from opposition, rebelling en masse against the final Russian takeover of their sphere of the country. Napoleon had played on this anger by creating a Polish-led Duchy of Warsaw, in union with Saxony as the old Commonwealth had occasionally been. Following Napoleon's defeat, the victorious powers realized that a rising Polish nationalism, as well as British support for some form of Polish statehood, meant that Berlin, Vienna, and St. Petersburg could not simply divide the area as before, but would have to make some compromises and concessions to the Poles and British, as well as to each other. In Krakow, the solution turned out to be the creation of a city-state, the free, independent, and neutral city of Krakow and its territories. The territory sat on the northern bank of the Vistula, comprising the city itself, which at the time only included the north bank, as well as much of the surrounding lowlands in the Vistula basin. The Constitution had been guaranteed May 3, 1815, as part of the ongoing Congress of Vienna. The Constitution was designed by Prince Adam George Czartoryski, a Polish nobleman who was an ardent supporter of the national cause. Power of government was given to an Assembly of Representatives, while executive power was controlled by a Senate. Thus, the president of the Senate was the de facto head of state, and for this, the body selected Stanislaw Wodzycki, who would maintain the position moving forward. Although 85% of its approximately 100,000 inhabitants were Polish Catholics, there was a significant Jewish presence as well. The Free City used the same currency as the neighboring Russian-led Polish territories, centered on Warsaw. These territories, to the north of Krakow, were part of an autonomous Polish kingdom, but with the Russian Tsar as its king. This had been a concession to Tsar Alexander I at the Congress of Vienna, with the state colloquially known as Congress Poland, and sharing a currency with the Free City also set up by the Congress. To the west lay Prussian Upper Silesia, conquered by Frederick the Great the previous century. To the south lay Habsburg crown lands recently unified into the Austrian Empire, with these possessions being part of Austria's empire outside of the Habsburg-led German Confederation, the Congress's replacement for the formerly Habsburg-led Holy Roman Empire and feudal kingdom of Germany. However, these territories had quite different histories. Galicia and Lodomeria had evolved from the old Rus kingdoms of Galich and Volodymyr, while the duchies of Auschwitz and Zator were part of Silesia and shared a history with territories to their northwest. Thus, in 1818, the Habsburgs annexed the latter two duchies into the German Confederation, while Galicia remained a part of Austria's other imperial crown lands. With the settling down of the situation in Europe generally, the status quo in the region would hold for some time. The first signs of renewed trouble would come in 1830. Up to that point, the compromises made by the three great powers at the Congress of Vienna had been enough to prevent a similar uprising to that which had occurred at the time of the initial partitions of Poland. However, the leaders of the 1794 uprising, such as Thaddeus Kosciuszko, still inspired many former Polish military men and noblemen alike. This included Czartoryski, the man who had written much of the Free City's constitution and who had at one time served as an official in the Russian part of Poland. In late November of 1830, an uprising started when Polish officer cadets in Warsaw staged an insurrection against Russian Viceroy Grand Duke Constantine. Constantine was forced to flee the city, and subsequently the local Polish Administrative Council had several nationalists join. They formed a provisional government which was initially hesitant to engage in war and entered negotiations with St. Petersburg. However, both the Tsar and the Polish nationalists remained stubborn, with the Russian Tsar deposed from the Polish throne in late January and a new national government being declared a few days later as preparations were being made for war. Despite his hesitation, Czartoryski became the initial head of this government. Battle would finally break out in early February. Although there was sympathy for the Polish cause around the world, the other European great powers, having agreed at the Congress of Vienna to what had been the status quo, declined to support what they saw as the Poles rocking the balance of the concert of Europe. The Russians ultimately crushed the Polish effort by the end of the year, with Czartoryski fleeing into exile. This entire saga had the great powers increasingly nervous about Krakow's situation, especially after Austrian intelligence snuffed out a plot for an uprising in the city. Within 2 years, the three constituent powers had agreed on a new constitution for the city-state, one limiting its autonomy and placing restrictions on freedom of the press. This turn away from Napoleonic law and the relative freedoms it provided served to chip away at the openly Polish character of the city-state. The three presiding powers also granted Austria the right to intervene in the event of future conflict in the territory. There was, however, still some autonomy, and some provisions of the original constitution remained in place, such as the right to mint its own currency. Following the November 1831 uprising, the Russian Kingdom of Poland had replaced the Polish eagle on its currency with the Russian Byzantine eagle. The Polish residents of Krakow refused to use the new currency, forcing the now more tightly controlled government of the city-state to appease the population by creating a Krakowian currency, with a design similar to that used by the Warsaw rebels 4 years earlier. However, this would be the city's last real exercise of its autonomy, which continued to be hemmed in by the constituent powers, especially Austria. In 1846, nationalism was on the rise across Europe, with the first spark of actual rebellion coming in Krakow. On February 20th, an uprising began, led by Polish noblemen and supported by the middle class and intellectuals. The rebels were led by Galician socialist Jan Tisowski. However, there was a significant conservative nationalist presence as well, backed by the noblemen. Faced with violent opposition, the Austrians were forced to withdraw from the city on February 21st. The provisional government declared the restoration of several of the elements of the original constitution, as well as the issuance of a manifesto for the Polish nation. On the 26th, the Austrians finally launched their response, crushing the Poles in the Battle of Gdów. The Austrians were assisted in their efforts by local peasants, with the Habsburg authorities exploiting the local resentment against the Polish noblemen, under whom they'd languished as impoverished serfs during the days of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. These Austrian attempts to win hearts and minds were wildly successful, with the local peasants not only joining the Austrians in their crushing of the uprising's forces, but also taking it to a level beyond what the authorities had intended and slaughtering up to 2,000 Polish noblemen across Galicia and the Free Territory, known as the Galician Slaughter. The Krakow uprising, meanwhile, continued to face stiff military opposition as well. On March 3rd, the Russians, on behalf of the Austrians, occupied the city, with the Austrians subsequently allowed to take control per the 1833 agreement. Tisowski fled with some of his forces to Prussia and eventually to America. On November 16th, a new agreement was reached between Austria and Russia. This ended Krakow's status as a free city, becoming a Habsburg crown land, the Grand Duchy of Krakow. 2 years later, when nationalist sentiments in the rest of Europe boiled over into revolutions, Krakow was not directly involved, as it was still experiencing the fallout from its own uprising. However, the Austrian empowerment of the peasants during the crisis 2 years earlier did lead to the abolition of serfdom in Galicia as part of continued Habsburg appeasement while they dealt with trouble elsewhere. The status quo would next be thrown up in the air following the breakout of the Austro-Prussian War, or the German Civil War, in 1866. Austria's defeat saw it lose control over all its non-crown lands in Germany, Prussia having assumed control over the rest of the German states following its victories over Vienna and Paris, and Russia now having fully incorporated its portion of the Polish lands following another uprising in 1867. The Austrian Habsburgs had been forced to make a compromise with the nobles of their Hungarian kingdom, which saw the reorganization of the empire's remaining crown lands as a dual monarchy. Krakow and the other nearby duchies would remain in the Austrian portion of the empire, the lands of the Imperial Council, as part of the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria. This status quo lasted another 40 years until the First World War, in the aftermath of which the area was repeatedly the subject of whirlwind changes once again, most of which we covered as part of the Collapse of Austria-Hungary series. With the entire area eventually coming under the control of the newly recreated Poland. In the Second World War, the area was once again divided up, this time, however, with infamous and tragic consequences. Most recently, the area was subjected to 45 years of communist rule. Today, however, Poland is a free and independent country once again, allowing Krakow to reclaim its place on the international stage as a historic cultural center. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a comment down below. It helps the algorithm, as does giving the video a like. Make sure to check out the project that provides the basis for these videos at apoliticalworldmap.org. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button. Share with anybody else who might be interested. And if you can, please donate on Patreon. Thanks again for watching. I'm Alex. I am out.